When Luffy came back at the beginning of the time skip, who was stronger between him, Kid, and Law? And to find the answer to this, we kind of have to look back at the beginning of the pre-time skip and then see what everybody was doing leading up to the beginning of the post-time skip. So let's do that, starting with Luffy. Because I would definitely say at Sabaody Archipelago, he was definitely the weakest out of the three. Which makes sense, out of the three of them, he's the one that ended up getting his crew wiped, even with Rayleigh helping him. But then after the Paramount War, he ended up training with Rayleigh to learn all three types of haki. And during this 2-year training period, he got good enough with his haki that he ended up learning Gear 4 before he even showed up to Sabaody again. And I would even say that Luffy became so adept at using his haki that he learned how to grow it on the fly too. That's why versus Katakuri he was able to pick up on Future Sight so fast. And Luffy didn't meet his first wall in the New World until he ran into Kaido. That was like the first time it was like, okay, I'm just not winning this thing. Big Mom kinda, but he was never intending to fight Big Mom in the first place. Now let's look at Law, because there's not too much to go off of here, but we do know enough about him during the 2 years leading up to the post-time skip. And during this time, he became the mastermind of the Rocky Port incident, which we still don't have full context for what happened there, but we know that Kobe, Blackbeard, and Law were big players. And thanks to all of their efforts, Blackbeard ended up ruling Full Lead Island, and I think this might have gave him like his first big Emperor territory. And since Law was the mastermind, I can, give him a lot of props for this situation. And I think that should go without saying because his bounty was 40 million more than Luffy's when he entered the post-time skip. Luffy didn't get 500 million until he beat Doflamingo. And while this doesn't tell us anything about how strong Law was during the pre-time skip to post-time skip period, we do learn when Kid and Law were fighting Big Mom that Kid asked Law like, hey, have your powers awakened? And Law told him that he's not used to it, but he can still do it. It's just like he can't do it in fights. Which means that before even coming to Wano, Law did have his awakening. Now, we're not sure when he got his awakening, but I think a safe bet would be the Rocky Port incident, since this was like the takedown of Wang Zi, who was somebody on Rox's pirate crew. And for anyone thinking, why didn't he do it versus Dofi? Keep in mind, earlier that day on Dressrosa, he did fight Fujitora and Dofi at the same time, so his stamina was probably already too shot to even try it out. Not to mention, he thought that Gamma Knife was going to be enough to beat Dofi. If he knew that it wouldn't have worked, maybe he would have tried something different, who knows. And last but not least, we got Captain Kidd, who we know was in Whole Cake Island causing havoc while Luffy was still in Fishman Island. And even before he did that, he had already fought the Red Hair Pirates where he lost his arm. So if he was wounding Big Mom's commanders and stuff while Luffy was still in Fishman Island, he was more than likely done with the Red Hair Pirates somewhere during the 2-year time skip. And then when you look at the stuff he was able to do on the rooftop, it's clear that he learned and gained a lot of experience with this Devil Fruit in those last 2 encounters with an Emperor. So essentially, in the 2-year time skip, Kid and Law were super active. One was fighting the Red Hair Pirates, and the other was helping Blackbeard become an Emperor, which is ironic because Blackbeard ends up running his pockets later. Meanwhile, Luffy spent all of his time in those 2 years training. So with all this information in mind, who would be the strongest out of these three at the beginning of the post-time skip? And I think the only correct answer is they were all equal. Different paths to power, but all equal at the end of the day. Because even though Kid and Law weren't getting like intense haki training from a figure like Rayleigh, becoming like a miniature haki master like Luffy, they were put in a situation where they had to awaken their Devil Fruits long before Luffy did. So they both had their awakenings coming into Wano. Their Devil Fruit usage was higher than Luffy's. Meanwhile, Luffy's haki usage was higher than the both of them. So if you're somebody that does want to have a winner to this conversation, you could say it like Luffy is stronger in haki than the two of them at the beginning of the post-time skip. But Kid and Law were definitely better at using their Devil Fruits than Luffy was at the beginning of the post-time skip. So when you look at it that way, they kind of balance themselves out. It's hard to say that any of these guys were better than the other definitively because they were all specializing in completely different things.